Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below the video, and that's where we pick from each week. There are like 23, 24, something like that, that we wrote down from last week's video. So thank you again for participating. We're trying to get ones that are relevant each week. We are at the Big Muddy Fish and Wildlife Refuge, National Refuge in Missouri, kind of almost halfway in between St. Louis and Kansas City. And you won't be able to tell it, but down below, right where I'm standing here, I'm on an observation deck. There's like a 200-foot drop right behind me, and the Missouri River used to run right here at the bottom, but now it's moved back a ways because, you know, rivers move. That's what they do. But this is a really beautiful wildlife refuge here. Okay, additionally this week there were 3 videos from the single plant videos, and I'm in the process of transferring the ones from the other channel to this channel, and then there's probably only going to be like 2 days a week that you're going to see single plant videos at that point. So the channel's not really, it's changing a little. I mean, it's not changing, it's just probably the 2 or 3 days a week that I didn't put up a video this past year, you know, as I was putting up like 4 a week. I'm going to fill them in with these single plant videos, but the rest of the channel will pretty much be the same. And we're working on an expansion in the Raleigh garden that I will hopefully be talking about pretty soon. And we have the Wallace garden that we'll be working on as well in these single plant videos. And then there'll be tours and all the other things I've always done. So again, you're seeing a lot of those videos right now, but that's part of it. As I had 72 videos over there, I want to get over here, and we've shot like 18 more, I think, something like that. So there's a bunch of them, but they'll be intermingled with other things, and you will have now seen the first 5-minute Friday video. So there's going to be every Friday, or I'm sure at some point I'll miss one, but every Friday I'm going to try to do some garden tip related video that's relevant to whatever's going on at that time. So hopefully, you know, this one was about watering, and Missouri River back here behind me is very low. The Ohio is low. The Mississippi, which comes right down the middle of the two of them and they join it, extremely low. It's like the entire northern part of the United States is extremely dry, and other areas as well. But it's incredible how much of the country is actually, and even up into Canada when we were up there weeks back, how much of it is actually dry. It's staggering amount of area that's actually that's missing water right now that they would normally have. And so that's part of the reason about the watering video for this first 5-minute Friday video. Also, the Learn to Garden video series is $50 off for the rest of the month, and you use code October to get the $50 off. And there's like, I don't know, 35 to 40 videos. I should probably count it because I keep guessing how many videos are on it. But there's a lot of videos on learning the garden, learning garden design, getting started with a garden, or redoing a garden, all kinds of things related to learning to garden. Okay, I addressed the plant-specific videos and their purpose, and they're going to be in playlist, and then you're going to see the reason for that as time goes on. As these things, like Radiant Sibilia videos in like 60 different playlists for pollinators, variegated plants, foundation plants, evergreen plants, like all the things that plant would fit are going to be in a playlist. And so in the future, you're going to be able to, you know, search for a particular plant, search for pollinator plants, search for evergreen plants, whatever you're looking for. Plants for your zone, and then they're in individual zones. So zone 5 pollinator plants, that kind of thing. Okay. So number 1 question for this week, what's the best time to visit the JCRA, the Ralston Arboretum in Raleigh for the fall color on the Japanese maples? Typically it's right around the end of October for us, even the first week of November. I don't know what it's going to look like this year. The trees are going to sleep, and I don't care where we are right now. They're going to sleep by just losing their leaves, or they're browned out. I mean, imagine we're going to get some fall color in some places, but a lot of other places, it's just not going to be. I mean, the trees down here, the vast majority of them have just already lost their leaves. They just went right to losing leaves rather than turning. But I can see this one red maple here behind me is getting a little bit of color in it. So maybe, I don't know, and this is an oak here, but there's a big red maple behind it. So again, I don't think it's going to be as good as it normally is, just because it's been so abnormally dry. It's been a tough year, heat-wise too in Raleigh. When is the time to winterize drip watering system? So this is another tricky thing, right? Because we're having to do a little more watering than we normally have to do in October in our gardens, but you don't want to push it to the point where you're damaging your irrigation system. So I would get it if your drip irrigation is connected to a faucet on the house, and that's you're running it through some sort of timer that way. Any night that's below freezing, I'd probably disconnect that timer from your tap on the house and, shake some of that water out of it probably, if it's just below freezing. But certainly anything in the forecast that's in the 20s, I'm probably going to go ahead and put that thing to sleep. You may want to water everything really well right before you do that, and then you can blow it out. You can put air through the system and make sure you blow most of the water out of that drip system. But anything in the 20s, that's probably when I would do it. And anything that's like 30, 31, 32, I'd probably disconnect it from the house if that's the way yours is set up. Somebody planted 23 Oakland hollies 15 months ago. So far, no berries. And then give them more time to berry, ? Yes, yeah, absolutely. It takes a while for any newly planted. This has only been 15 months. Ours have... it fruits a lot. I only have, even our my best fruiting holly this year in the garden in Raleigh is that screenplay holly, and it is when we left the house, it was absolutely covered in berries. It hadn't started turning yet; they were still green, but it was 2 years before that thing. I mean, last year it didn't have a single one, and this year it's absolutely full. So it can take a while for those kinds of things to take place. We don't know how well it flowered back in the spring. It's all about how well it flowered back in the spring, right? As to how, and the stress that it went through establishing itself since it was, since it flowered in the spring, as to whether all those things would have taken place. But probably next year. More, as long as as long as they're happy. Let's see, this person wants a hedge of low growers. They're thinking about pugster butterfly bushes. Should they plant now or plant in the spring? So this is a good question on butterfly bushes. So if the butterfly bush, and I don't care whether it's pugster or butterfly candy or any of the other dwarf butterfly bushes, or any butterfly bush for that matter. Here's the thing with them. They actually lose more of them on the Gulf Coast than you lose up in northern areas. They have an extremely wide range, zones 5 to 9, maybe even 4 to 9 on some of them. I have no idea, but when the growers on the Gulf Coast actually have a problem with these with butterfly bushes, because they don't go to sleep, and then all of a sudden they only get 5 really cold nights a winter, and those 5 cold nights can kill them because the butterfly bush is still awake and it still has moisture in the stems, and they crack down at the base and die. I lost a lot of butterfly bushes over the years that way, and growing them near Raleigh in North Carolina, where they just don't go to sleep. We stay warm in November, December, and then we get really cold all of a sudden at the beginning of January, cold for us, and the plant's not asleep. And so that's the problem with them. The entire point of this is, if you go to buy the dwarf butterfly bushes, they should be going to sleep. They should be winding down. They should look like they came from your area and be similar to the ones that are in the ground in your area. And if they are, then I'd put them in the ground. If you go to buy the dwarf butterfly bushes and they're still in bloom and they've got lots of fresh leaves and they're actively growing, that's probably not a butterfly bush I want to put in the ground going right into winter, because that is the issue with them. They're just not good at going to sleep. and then they have moisture in their stems, and then they crack the first hard freeze you get. So that's very butterfly bush specific answer, really, to that one, is that if they're growing and active, I don't want to put them in the ground right before you get any real cold. And I don't know where this person was, so that's another question. But they should kind of Oh, okay, in zone 8A. So yeah, make sure they're kind of look like they're winding down, and then they should be fine. Okay, somebody has a fatsia in zone 8A, North Carolina, wants to prune up the fatsia to expose the decorative, to expose some decorative boulders. Can they do it now? Do they need to protect the cuts? And are they protected by, or are they protected by the overhead branches, or wait until late winter? I'd wait to do any pruning on fatsia, just because it's just, you know, zone 8A. I don't know how long the thing's been. Well, if they're at the point where they can limb it up, it's probably been there for a while, and you could probably get away with whatever thing you want to do on it. But just in general, fatsia, zone 7B, zone 8A, I'm probably going to lean toward being a little more cautious and do any major pruning and cutting until spring. The cuts will be fine on them. Never thought about protecting a fatsia. And fatsia is one of those interesting things. I'm a little delicate with it at first, and then once it's an established shrub that's woody and is at the point where you might be limbing it up into a tree or deciding to cut it in half, once they get to that point, they're very tough as any other thing in your garden. But you know, I might wait until late spring if it doesn't matter to you, or till late winter if it doesn't matter to you. This person's in the Pacific Northwest, zone 8A. They tilled grass because it was like concrete. They used mulch and compost before planting. How long does it take for the soil to recover from the damage tilling causes? Well, if it was like concrete, you weren't damaging anything, right? When I talk about, I talk about limiting the amount of tilling, and this is something that's in the Learn to Garden video series. I cover tilling in that series because I think it's important to understand that if you're starting from nothing, tilling is not an issue. It's more about you take an established garden bed and you go, I'm going to run a tiller through it. And you've got all that life in there that you're bringing up and exposing to the sunlight and the air and elements, and you're killing all the life that you worked on building or that you inherited through buying the house or whatever. You're killing the soil that way, and you potentially, leaving exposed to runoff and all kinds of things, right? So that's why I say tilling is killing. But not if you started with nothing. And so the vegetable garden at the house, I tilled it initially when we initially sodded the small space in the front garden and the back garden. I tilled for that. That soil wasn't, we hadn't advanced it far enough to say tilling is killing because there was nothing to kill. It was just a weedy space that we were, taking on. So, I wouldn't hesitate to till something that you needed to, that you were trying to crank the beginning of a project where you're trying to crank it up and get it going, because that's the thing that's going to allow air down into the soil, allow it a little easier for the microbes and the earthworms and all the other things that can move in there to operate, with your compost layer. So I don't think you're waiting for it to recover from the tilling. I think you're just waiting for, it takes a little while for that mulch and compost cover, to have some impact to allow all that other life to come in and, and occupy that space. So you didn't do anything wrong. That's the point of it, is that if you're starting from nothing, I would absolutely go grab a tiller and till it if you thought it was overly compact or there was going to be advantageous in some way to till it for you. Maybe you want to remove a bunch of small rocks and you want to get them up to the top and, collect rocks for a month or something, those kinds of things. But it's more about once you have an established situation going, not tilling it at that point. Can the Empress of China dogwood be tree formed? Is it fragrant? It's not fragrant. It's about the most colorful thing in the world when it comes into full flower. It will kind of tree form itself. You won't have the option really in the future as to, mine looks like a shrub, but it is now the bottom of the tree, because it's vase shaped this way. This is the thing with all these trees. They're all kind of vase shaped this way rather than this. The conifers tend to grow like Christmas trees, and some of the leafy evergreen shrubs tend to grow like this. And that allows the sun to go all the way to the bottom of the plant, right? That's why they're, Christmas tree shaped things grow like this. So they have the light, the sun basically hits the whole thing. But that Empress of China dogwood grows like this. It's vase shaped like that, a bit wider at the top. So eventually the bottom limbs are going to die on it anyway. It won't have enough sunlight. So that's even camellias and any shrub or tree that grows this way, eventually it's exposing its own trunk. Yes, you can tree form it, and it will tree form itself. I'm already losing some bottom limbs on mine. Okay, so number 8 is any updates on the Wallace project that we'll be designing and planting. We had just covered that thing in wood and kind of walked away from it for a little while. We're just waiting for some of that stuff to break down a bit, but it'll be, I don't know if we'll go over there in December and spend a little bit of time. We may have one update video in December, and then we'll get started on it sometime in February or March for sure. So there'll be some content. I didn't want to wear out the content on we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that and look what we're gonna do. I wanted to actually go over there actually doing something and have the content be, actually moving it forward. Right now it's just wood sitting on the ground, trying to do what we just talked about, trying to get the soil improved and awake and receptive to things that we want to do on it in the future. Okay, somebody's in zone 8B. They've got a Angiostar fatshedra. That was one of the videos that went up this past week or the week before. Holly and Griffin are out here as well. And they have a fatshedra Angiostar with flopping 2 main stems. Needs to fatten it up. So could they prune off the tops? Yeah, you absolutely can prune off the tops, but just wait until spring. I said in the video, I meant to say in the video anyway, that what tends to happen on them, especially in zone 8, is they don't stop growing, and so then they get frost. They get frost damage, freeze damage on that new growth in the winter time. And that is like a free pruning almost. So it just kind of happens naturally. You'll see that the ends will die on them, and that will encourage new growth, either branching off of those stems or suckering growth. It's going to happen regardless in zone 8 for sure, because that's what's happened with ours. Now we have we kind of have too many upright stems now because of frost and freezes in the winter have damaged that late new growth. Okay. So somebody said, Pieris moving in late winter, fear they are root bound. Follow best practices or other issues that may need to be addressed. If you pull something out of the ground and you can still see it is like it was when you pulled it out of the pot, you can still see the circular matted roots. And I've done this a lot. I've pulled plants out as a landscaper probably 2 and 3 years, after they had gone in the ground, and the person had kept the foundation planting a little too wet, irrigating their lawn or whatever, or kind of over irrigated them, and they never rooted out. And I pull it out of the ground and it's still in that exact same root bound shape that it was when it went in the ground. If you can still see that, yeah, then I'd probably go ahead and treat it as a new planting and cut those roots around the outside. If you can see, if it's coming out that way, a lot of that may have died off and corrected itself already. You'll know when you pull it out of the ground if you need to. But if you pull it out of the ground and you still see, because Pieris is one of those, I talked about last week, one of those ericaceous plants has a really fibrous root system, and it mats really heavily in the container. And like azaleas, you need to take a knife and go from the top to the bottom on those root balls and cut some of that stuff when you're putting them in the ground. But if that's what it looks like when you pull it out, correct it. If it's corrected itself, just transplant them like you'd have transplanted anything else. Somebody has some vigorous Pachysandra or Japanese spurge. Should they be concerned about that competing with the other shrubs? I think, if it's growing vigorously already and you're already concerned about it, 2 things. Number 1, yes, you want to. I'm not worried about it out-competing shrubs necessarily if the shrubs have been established as long as the Pachysandra has, but I am worried about it climbing up in it. So I would go occasionally and get it away from the plants. And then secondly, if you're already concerned about how aggressive this Pachysandra is being in your garden, that's not going to get better. And it may be that it's less about it competing with the shrubs and more about it out-competing you and your ability to maintain it in the future. So keep that in mind. These things, some of these ground covers can get more and more and more aggressive over time, and to the point where, you know, we can lose control over them. So if you already have a question about it, maybe you're on your way to that already, and you may want to remove the Pachysandra or reduce the space that it's in, and isolate it to a narrower space for the future before it becomes way too much maintenance. But yeah, get it away from those shrubs occasionally, but not something I'm worried about a whole lot. Is it okay to limb up a pink dogwood now or wait until it's dormant? I'd wait until it's dormant, but I always talk about these pruning specific questions where you're talking about pruning a limb off of something here or a crazy limb there. That usually, for the most part, you can do those things 12 months out of the year. If you need to prune off 20 limbs off the bottom of it to limb it up, then maybe I wait until it's dormant, and I wait till the best time. But if you're asking me if it's one limb down at the bottom of it, I'm taking that thing off July 12th or December 13th or whatever day it is. It doesn't matter to me. I'll get it off the list and move on. So somebody said, will birds eat the seeds off of Vitex? So Vitex they bloom all season, and ours was in bloom this week. It's still in bloom. And they do produce a seed, and you know, in Texas, I know Vitex Agnes castus is on the invasive list, mildly invasive list, because it does produce seed, and the birds do distribute those seeds. So yes, for us though, I don't know that I've ever seen birds on them, but I do know that they do produce seed, and birds distribute those seeds in places where it's invasive. So I don't know if I just don't have the right bird or what, but yes, they do produce seeds that the birds take. And if you're in a place, unfortunately, where they could be invasive, it's mildly invasive, but where they could be invasive, you know, that may actually be a bad issue, a bad thing, not a good thing. Let's see, we're up to number 14. So somebody has an oak leaf hydrangea that broke off at the base by a squirrel their dog was chasing. They staked it. Will it grow back together like a grafted plant, still alive after a week? Yeah, you can bend it up like that, and if it's connected, it can heal potentially. What's more likely to happen is it'll go dormant, and then you're going to get new suckering down at the base from that. Whatever that damage there was going to create a situation where it's likely going to sucker and give you some additional growth next year. So regardless, I think you're going to be okay with it. We've had a deer bite 2 of them off in our garden, and a year later they were he actually did us a favor on one and took a single trunk little oak leaf hydrangea, and now it's a nice looking little plant. So regardless of whether it'll heal back in place. Now, if you could get down in there and you could tie it together in some way, you could probably get it to heal. It's so much time has passed that it may not actually work without a fresh wound. You'd have to have some sort of fresh wound to reinitiate that graft. But it sounds like maybe that branch is going to survive. But again, damage, even without cutting it completely off, is going to stimulate other growth. The plant's going to it's got other ways to try to survive, and it probably will sucker in the spring. Let's see. Time to transplant butterfly bushes in Tennessee Zone 7B. You could probably transplant them anytime. I think if you watch our content over the years, we've transplanted a couple of butterfly bushes now, and they've all been done in the late winter, early spring with success. And so that's the best time. But again, if it's one in, we were talking about the not going to sleep well, but if it's in your own garden, it's on the same clock, it's on the right clock for your area. So really, butterfly bushes are tough enough that's a plant that, for me, I'd cut the thing in half July 10th, and I'd move the thing across the garden without hesitation. That's how tough they are. Again, though, I'd cut it in half if it was actively growing. So the best time, late winter, early spring before it's waking up, but any time probably for anybody. If you cut it in half and move it, the thing's going to be fine, and then keep an eye on the watering. Okay, so somebody has a Zelkova 10 feet from their pool. Will the roots be a problem? I can't really testify to these root-related questions. We had Zelkovas in the parking lot at the garden center that I worked at when I was 18 years old. I guess that parking lot got built maybe I was 19 or 20, working at the garden center, and those Zelkovas went in. They grew like weeds out there. And they were in little islands with concrete around them. And I don't think they could have ever hurt any of that stuff, although the roots are pretty big. So I'm not going to say that it's unlikely to happen. I think long before the Zelkova roots hurt your pool, you're going to pull them out because of the mess that they make. It is, those trees drop. They are one of those trees and I would describe it like a river birch, because probably people have experience with this. River birches will come out in the spring and they'll leaf out and they'll grow like 6 feet. I mean, really rapid growth. And what they do is they basically use up all the water and resources they can, growing. And as soon as they get any pushback, where it gets slightly dry or hot, hot day, in late May, early June, they shed about a third of those leaves. And grass is all of a sudden covered in river birch leaves in the summer. And it's just kind of some sort of growth technique. I would say that Zelkova does a similar thing, and it was just constantly dropping leaves, and they're small leaves, and I just think they're going to drive you crazy near your swimming pool. So I don't know that for me, that was more the issue than the roots. But the roots may also ultimately be a problem if you've got over pulling tiny Zelkova leaves out of your pool for a lot of little leaves out of your pool. Okay, somebody's in Zone 7, Tennessee, transplanting perennials and planting a bunch of new ones. Frost coming. Did I make a mistake? No. As long as you're planting hardy stuff, there's no real reason not to be digging them up. I think that'll be one of the upcoming videos we talk about. Is this is a good and that's the kind of thing that's in the weekly garden planner too, talking about the timing on any of these transplanting and dividing hardy perennials. This is a good time. It doesn't really have anything to do with the frost, especially if they've already pretty much died back. They've taken those nutrients and put them back down in the roots. Then no real reason that you can't move them around. Again, I wouldn't move the least hardy thing in your entire garden right before a freeze. That's not the plant to move. But if it's it's a zone 5, a coneflower that's hardy in zone 5 and you're in zone 7, yeah, move, whatever. Move any of those things. Number 18, can Carex be size controlled, and what is the best time, and can they be pruned hard? So most of the new hybrid Carexes that we're using in our gardens, there's a lot of straight species Carex being used, like Carex pennsylvanica and others. So there are a lot of straight species ones, but the vast majority of the more decorative variegated gold Carexes are hybrids. They're interspecies hybrids for the most part, and they've been bred for some vigor, and so they can grow pretty quickly in our gardens. Can they be pruned hard is a good question. They don't come back as readily as like Liriope does. So if you're looking at, how you treat Liriope at the end of every winter, you cut it back to the ground and it comes back bigger, better, fuller, and it tends to look better during the growing season and have flowers on it this time of year in the fall and look pretty good as a garden plant. Not a giant Liriope fan, but I mean, with using best practices of how to take care of them, they actually can be pretty nice plants. Carex just don't come back as well. Some people, so let's take Everillo Carex as an example. They're hardy in zone 5 to 9. In zone 5, they get pretty rough looking and probably need to be cut back in order to look their best. As you get further down towards zone 9, they look fine coming out of winter, and you're best not to cut them back because, again, they come back so slowly compared to other things. And so the best time to prune them back would be in the late winter. Let that foliage protect that crown of that plant and get them in the late winter before that new growth starts. Any grass-like plant, Carex isn't technically a grass, but it's a grass-like plant, that new foliage starts coming up in the middle of it, that's almost too late to cut it back because you're cutting back all that new growth on it. So you got to get it before that new growth starts. And the question about them being size control, you're not going to size control them through pruning. They're going to come back to the exact same size that they were and the same exact season. So not like an abelia or something that's gotten 6 feet tall. If I cut it down to 2 feet tall, I can get maybe 2-3 seasons before it's back to 6 feet tall, maybe, depending on, you know what I mean. these grass-like plants, they're coming back to the same height than they were the last year, bigger and better and fuller than they were the last year. So in terms of size controlling it, you can control the width of it though, because you could dig it up and divide it during the winter. At the same exact time, you might be considering pruning it back. You could pop it out of the ground and divide it. Even now, you could, dig it out of the ground and cut it and divide it. And that way you're starting with a smaller plug next season, so it won't get quite as big. So you can size control the width, not necessarily the height. Okay. So this is a good question, number 19 here. Should I be concerned about daffodil foliage emerging already in Florida, Zone 8A? I'm sure ours is going to as well. Everything is so off, and really I think the last 3 years we've had our daffodils come up this fall period of time as it was really transitioning, this part of fall where it's really transitioning to, you can tell winter's coming, and the days are shorter and all that. We're seeing our daffodils pop up, and then they're fine. They end up blooming the next year, but that foliage above the ground gets damaged by the cold during the winter time, and so then the foliage looks rough. But they do end up blooming, but they don't look as good as they would have otherwise. So I don't think it's a big concern unless they've jumped up 6 inches or something, obviously. But where they're poking up through the soil, I expect ours to do the exact same thing here pretty soon. And then they just sit there, but then, like I say, it gets burned and it doesn't look good because that's the tip of the foliage. So, the plant, it'll end up 18 inches tall, the foliage will, and it'll be burned up at the top. Not a lot we can do about it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's some sort of heat stress, summer dormancy that's causing this, where the plant feels like it went into a dormancy and then it tried to grow a little bit and then it went, oh no, it's cold, and it stopped. Same thing as the Edgeworthia last week, where the buds are much bigger this year than they typically are going into winter. I don't know. Somebody said they can't find a little Heath Pieris anywhere in the trade. Why? Yeah, I don't know. Well, one thing I can say, Pieris is not the easiest plant in the world to grow. It tends to be grown in nurseries and cooler areas for sure. You can't really grow them right down on the Gulf Coast. So there's some nurseries that just flat out can't grow them at all. But then beyond that, any named variety plant, any new thing that you're looking for, a lot of times these things take a lot of time to get into the trade. A lot of times something that's been in the trade for a long time gets displaced by something else. I said that at Garden in Kentucky the other day. I liked Rose Creek Abelia, but I thought it was weird to me that when it came along, it completely displaced the one that was before it, Little Richard Abelia. I mean, it wasn't like, they're both great plants, and not knocking one, saying one is better or worse than the other. It was just weird to me that literally the entire world stopped growing the other one immediately. And it just seemed like an opportunity where if one person had continued to grow the one that everybody knew the name of, maybe they'd still be selling them. So the nurseries tend to go all together, certain nurseries, and then some, again, there's just a lot of plants. There's a lot of name varieties, a lot of name cultivars out in the world. And it's really hard as a grower to decide what to grow because you're committing resources to something that's going to take you sometimes 3 years, if you're doing them from cuttings in-house. A 3-gallon Pieris is probably 3 years in the making. And so you're committing a lot to that. And it's hard, and it's really hard to go into a nursery as a person who is speaking for the Southern Living Plant Collection on Corzelias, Better Boxwood, some of the brands that, I work with personally and plant development services. Going into a nursery and telling a nurseryman who's had 4 to 5 incredible years since COVID that, I've got all these things you should be growing, and they're doing just fine with what they're doing right now because, the business has been so good with 20 million new gardeners that have entered gardening in the last 5 years. So again, there's really no telling on a lot of these things, but I would explore mail order occasionally. And I love, again, I'm a equal opportunity person going to I love the cart at the Ralston Arboretum for buying plants, and the North Carolina Botanic Garden in Chapel Hill, you know, usually has some native plants for sale there, and then our garden centers, and then mail order, and then traveling and going to garden centers. So I'm an equal opportunity plant purchaser, and so definitely explore mail order as well. Spent a long time on that. Didn't know that was question number 20. Okay. Okay, how to keep a sky pencil holly, the center of it, from losing leaves. Water, unfortunately. Japanese hollies, and I talked about this on the 5-minute video on Friday about fall watering. Japanese hollies are terrible at letting us know they're dry, and sky pencils will kind of show that, you know, from the center out, like a lot of plants. The cinder branches on them will die before the exterior ones will, and then they just look weird where they're kind of dead up through the middle of the plant. But that was the only plant. Sky pencil holly is the only plant that I grew in a 3-gallon or bigger container at my nursery that I left pot to pot, because I knew that I would get extra water in the pots that way. Because normally the pots are separated and you're throwing water over the top. So 3/4 of the water, maybe more, is missing any pot. It's just hitting fabric, right? And landing and washing and just running back to the pond. If something is pot to pot, all the water ends up in the pots. And so by having them pot to pot, the upright, narrow habit of them caught the water and then dropped it right into each individual pot. And they just love that water. I'm not saying plant them in a bog, but I'm just telling you that plant them like you normally would, but you need to keep an eye on them watering, because they don't let you know. They're like conifers. Japanese hollies just start shedding leaves. That's compacta and helleri and soft. I imagine a lot of people have soft touch hollies out there in the world that are half dead after this year, because they are terrible at letting you know, and then they just up and die. That's what soft touch does. It's another Japanese holly. So it was probably a lack of water at some point that caused it. Okay. So somebody said they're in the UK. This person's in the UK, said YouTubers say to prune a hydrangea paniculata 1/3 each year. Eventually huge though. Yeah, because that's true. Because if it's 6 feet and you take 2 feet off of it and then it grows 4 feet, you know, this math starts to be where it's a tree hydrangea, because that's hydrangeas are paniculatas or tree hydrangeas. Why can't you prune them to the ground each year? And then somebody had said below it, they have a dwarf one that's on. You know, obviously you can buy hydrangea paniculatas now that are supposed to stay smaller. Even those are going to creep up in time, year to year over year. And then somebody had commented that they are very wispy with all that new growth if you're cutting them to the ground every year. I don't, you know, with my moon dance and white wedding at the house, ours are not wispy, and we do cut them down to the ground. So I like cutting them just like a butterfly bush down to 14, 18 inches tall, something like that, and the new growth that comes out. But mine are in a lot of sun, and that sunlight is important, I think, for keeping them compact. But my white wedding and moon dance out in the front garden bloomed at about 3.5 feet, something like that. And they were cut to the ground during the winter time. If I pruned 1/3 of them back this winter, the next year they'd be blooming at 5 feet. And if I did that again, they'd be blooming at 7 feet, and eventually would be tree hydrangeas. So my technique is cutting them down to the ground. I think that's the way to go. If yours are coming back wispy, it might be the variety you have. It could be that they're in too much shade, you know, and they're reaching. You know, you also have the option. One other option is to cut them to near the ground and then they'll really race out of the ground pretty quickly. And then you can cut some of that growth, just tip prune that growth after about a month of growth. And then that'll help thicken them up, and then you'll get new growth off of that. And they'll still bloom, may push back the bloom a week or two later in the season. But that's one option where you could tip prune the new growth. But I cut mine down because I'm not, where I have mine planted, I can't have them be 8 or 9 or 10 feet tall. Let's see. This person is trying to improve clay soil in an existing bed with several established trees and shrubs. Would several inches of wood chips help? Afraid existing trees and shrubs will be too deep. Is this not a good idea? Yeah, I think once you have an established bed of things planted, I think your time has passed for you to be able to do the deep wood chip method in those beds, unless you have open space. But you definitely do not want to be piling these wood chips up against your established trees and established shrubs. But again, if there's open space in it, you can, at least come in and do 3 or 4 inches of it. But the rest of the, the bed where the existing stuff is, I don't think that's a good idea. I think at this point, if it was bare soil, you could put down a thin layer of compost and then hardwood mulch over that. And that would at least kind of recreate the forest floor. That's really what, at the end of the day, in your garden, you're trying to recreate the forest floor. And if I go, there's a forest down here behind me. If we go down there, the top of the forest floor is going to have chunkier material, and that's your hardwood mulch. But in this forest down here, it's going to be small limbs and leaves and sticks and whatever, cones and everything else that's fallen on the top. And then if you dig down below that a little bit, you're going to reach this humus layer, which would be basically your compost layer that you're putting down, and then you'd reach your soil. Okay, and that allows that life, all that stuff to break down and just become part of that, the thing that refeeds these plants. And so that's what you're trying to duplicate in your garden. So you could compost and hardwood mulch, but not enough that is so thick that it's hurting existing things. But if there is open space anywhere in the bed, you could put some wood chips in those spaces. Last question for this week will be related to Hurricane Helene. Those of you who have questions, directly from trying to recover plants from this event, you can send photos of plants that you're trying to prune or however to HortTube@gmail.com, and I'll try to help with some of those where I can. Again, I'm not there to see it, and so it's a lot. Sometimes I am guessing at some of the answers, but I know that there's a lot of cleanup in a lot of gardens and a lot of things that are going to take a long time to recover from in various levels of damage that people have from these events. But the last question for this week is a Hurricane Helene kind of related question. And again, you can ask those down in the bottom, and I'll do my best to answer them how I can, going forward. So this person has a 60 to 70 foot tall pine tree, and the bark blew off of it during the hurricane. They couldn't tell if it was bark beetles. Is there anything that they can do? I don't know that there's not a whole lot you can do to recover from the bark coming off of that pine. Whether or not it was bark beetles, if the bark is still there and you can examine it, you can see the holes where they bore through the bark, and you can also see where they bored through the bark and into the actual tree. So you can see that scarring. I don't know how high up on the tree it is. But that may give you some idea of whether or not it was bark beetles that initially caused the damage by examining either the bark, if it's still present on the property, or trying to maybe take some sort of 40 megapixel photo or something up higher so that you can blow it up on your computer and see if you can see any scarring or holes into the tree itself from those bark beetles. But in all likelihood, it was something related, something was bad before this, came along. Something was probably going wrong with it. Whether or not the tree is, and I also don't know how much bark blew off of this tree. That's really the determining factor as to whether or not the tree is going to be dead or not. As I'm standing here answering a question in Missouri about it, it doesn't sound promising. For that particular tree. That's what I'll say. But you can examine the bark if you can and see if you can see the holes in it, and that'll give you some idea of whether or not you had bark beetles, and if you have other pines in your garden, those may need to be examined as well. So thank you guys very much for following along with the channel and asking all these great questions every week. Again, the Learn to Garden video series is $50 off through the month of October. There'll be another 5-minute Friday video definitely this week. a Connecticut roadside thing that we filmed like a month ago or more of a really nice garden. It was in front of a shop. I'm going to get that video up this week, and then a few of the plant videos as well. So thank you guys so much for following along.